Burnout is a prolonged chronic stress. Burnout is when rest stops working. Things that were previously you liked, you don't like them anymore. They don't have that impact on you anymore.
One thing that I have noticed that I do a lot of is doom scrolling. Is it just addiction or is there an underlying something there?
Why are you watching reel after reel? You're looking for something, you're seeking something. They're providing you with these micro spikes of dopamine. People have started thinking of dopamine as the pursuit of pleasure. My favorite saying, which I often say in sessions, is that how can you pour from an empty cup?
How do I deal with the feelings of guilt that are attached to apna pyala bharna?
Up until a certain life stage, parents were not emotionally present.
No. I feel a little bad for our parents because we're a generation who keeps saying, oh, because of our parents, we have all these traumas. Yeah. But the reality is that the poor things went through so much and they couldn't call it traumas to begin with, right? Is this a point of no return or are there ways for us to come back from this flatline situation? I'm going to say something ridiculously controversial. Hello and welcome to the Shezzi M Show. This is a podcast that highlights the vagaries of 21st century living and how to hack it. I am your friendly neighborhood Shezzi. Now, I don't know how you have managed to make your way to my YouTube channel. If you just randomly saw one curly-haired crazy girl and said, "Oh, so cute," fine. But if you have followed me from my radio days, then you would know that for the better part of a decade, I have spoken very actively about mental health. Back in the day, जब हम बात करते थे about mental health, it was just to let you know that guys, mental health issues are real. Cut to the fag end of 2025 and we're standing on the cusp of 2026, and fortunately or unfortunately, people are mighty aware that yes, mental health issues are real, which is why I thought that I would bring on board a very special person to talk about mental health. She is somebody really, really special to me because Farah Tasneem has been my therapist in the past as well. She has come down all the way from Bangalore. She works with Anna Chandy and Associates, and she started her career as a hotshot corporate executive with an MBA under her belt and all of that until she realized that humans and humanity is what she can add value to. She has since then really actively worked towards destigmatizing mental health. Her clients absolutely adore her for the simple reason that she is deeply intuitive, deeply, deeply empathetic. And with that, hi Farah.
Hello, I miss that glorious introduction. Thank you so much.
I already mentioned to you that Farah has been my therapist. I was almost 2 years postpartum. I thought I was killing it. I was not. And that's a conversation for another day. But this conversation is about burnout because my entire life I've always been a very service oriented person in the sense that I've always been like a paid salaried professional. I decided to start my own job, my own business. And what happened was I was running around like a headless chicken. Farah saved me back in the day, and we're going to talk about that. But for everybody watching right now, what does burnout really look like, Farah?
Yeah, it's you mentioned postpartum. Postpartum is also burnout, actually. But yes, burnout largely, of course, depending on your context in your life, burnout is a prolonged chronic stress and a physical and an emotional exhaustion. And what is stress? Stress is a response to pressure, right? To situations like too much work, too many responsibilities, too many roles to juggle, you name it, right? So burnout is when it's not just overtiredness, which normally people kind of mistake it for. It's a kind of life overwhelm where everything just feels too much and rest stops helping, and there is you actually come crashing down to a place of complete flatness. That I think, simply put, would be what burnout is.
So, you said that rest does not help, but a lot of us are now in this whole space of rest is poison, like we're constantly wanting to be busy. and we wear it like a badge of honor, Farah.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh my God, I'm so busy. I don't have time to breathe. Yeah, come
Yeah.
on, yeah.
Yeah.
So, what is that? Is that also an aspect of burnout that we're not acknowledging?
Absolutely. And actually, the larger term for it is the efficiency trap. That, just because you've been efficient and you've done a great job at something, it kind of becomes the baseline. So, something that you've done on a deadline, quick speed, efficiency, high efficiency, is not looked at as a bonus or a go to for extreme situations. It's looked at as the new baseline. When you finish tasks quickly, the time or space that it opens up is quickly filled with new things to do, right? Yes. You're always evaluating your day with how productive it was. And, there's almost like a kind of guilt for a day where you didn't have much to show for, right? So this is the efficiency trap that we think that just because we're efficient and we're doing things faster, quicker, it just becomes and increasingly, successively becomes the new normal. And and yes, along with that, the other thing that you said, that we wear it like a badge of honor, there is definitely a grandiosity that we all have around our indispensability to a particular situation, a job, a role. And somewhere we just feel that if it is not done today or yesterday, things will fall apart. Yes. Or that if I'm not there, maybe as a mother or as in any other role, that role will collapse. Yes. Right? Or how will they work without me? So definitely there is it's a fad also. Yeah.
You mentioned as far as wrapping up something is concerned, then you have all this free time, but that free time is not free time because you're dumping some more things to do in that time.
Yeah.
One thing that I have noticed that I do a lot of is doom scrolling. Not anymore, to be fair, but there was a time, and I think you know that exact time because that was the time you and I were working together.
Yeah.
And I just started the business, and I was pitching to all these clients, and I was so sleep deprived because my daughter was also keeping me awake in the nights, and I was exhausted, and I felt like I was just basically sucking in life in general and everything. And the only solace that I had was to just endlessly keep doom scrolling. Of course, I'm going to say that that was just fatigue, but is it just addiction or is there an underlying something there?
Actually, it's before we use the word addiction, it's important to understand what addiction is over here. And addiction is actually, in this case, specifically with respect to doom scrolling, is a kind of dopamine hijack. And what is dopamine? That's also another, by the way, misused word these days, that, it's the reward chemical, sure. But people have started thinking of dopamine as the pursuit of pleasure. Whereas it is actually the pleasure of pursuit. It is where our motivation comes from. And people have now started actually misusing it in a way to think that, that's what I need to get to get that hit. Right. Cut to doom scrolling. See, the thing with social media and these reels that we are watching on YouTube, Insta, all of that, they're providing you with these micro spikes of dopamine, right? So it's so seductive. It's so seductive, and but there's so much information. There is so much stimulation that instead of calming us or our nervous system, it actually ends up overstimulating it and overwhelming us. So it's a very chicken and egg situation because anxiety leads to scrolling and scrolling leads to anxiety.
Yeah.
So it's like that. You're not able to get off the hook.
I understand that doom scrolling may not necessarily be addictive tendencies. And I'm saying this because I remember the last time I was griping to you and saying, Farah, look at me, I'm all the time on the phone and, I think there's something wrong with me and this is an addiction. And you said, please calm down and don't use that word lightly. And secondly, that was the time my business was just about starting and I had all these uncertainties. And you're like, you probably just need a win. And that's where this behavior is coming from. So when and I know that there's a whole bunch of people who are struggling with doom scrolling, then it makes more sense to examine what's going on underneath, right?
Yeah, see, the thing is that let's just take a minute to understand the chemistry, the what's happening inside, right? What we see as doom scrolling, what's happening inside. So there are all these hormones, neurotransmitters that we have heard of, dopamine, endorphin, serotonin, all of these. And see, there is a hormonal balance. So basically, there's a cocktail of hormones inside us, and there is a balance that makes us, work well optimally,
Right.
and what I use the term normally. I don't know what that means, but which work with a certain equilibrium. But what happens is that when there is anxiety, when there is stress, and that stress starts becoming prolonged, extended periods of time, right? It's all piled up inside, and the alarm emergency hormones, which is cortisol and adrenaline, start getting generated. But they're not getting expended anywhere. So they're getting stored inside you, right? And what's happening is that there's an imbalance that has got created inside, and which shows up in different ways for different people, which are also they also happen to be the signs of burnout. So an emotional flatness, feeling a sense of apathy, yeah, feeling very tired, that sleep is not, even despite sleeping, not feeling rested, feeling a cognitive fog, irritability, exaggerated reactions, feeling checked out from relationships, etc. But actually, what's happening inside is that you're still wanting to find something to hold on to, and doom scrolling or reels or something. Why are you watching reel after reel? You're looking for something, you're seeking something in it, right?
Yeah.
And you're trying to perhaps calm down your nervous system, distract yourself. But like I said earlier, anxiety leads to scrolling, and scrolling leads to anxiety, because social media also comes with its set of, self doubt. So it feeds your anxiety, in fact. So what you're calling as addiction, I'd actually like to call it like a negative loop, or a spiraling thing. Uh, yeah.
Actually, I never thought about it from that perspective. But what I do want to take away from this conversation is that don't keep beating yourself up about, oh my God, like again you're doom scrolling. I think it's really great to have this perspective. So I have that moment the minute I'm reaching for my phone, which, let's face it, on really stressful days, I still do.
Yeah.
I'm just going to have that moment to be able to pause and say that, do I really need to do this? And maybe I think there's also an element of shame attached to me picking up the phone and saying,
Absolutely.
there you go again, Shezzi. So I'm really grateful for that perspective. And in fact, speaking of all the cool jargons that we keep throwing at each other, I'm so triggered, this is so addictive, or I'm so burnt out. You already flagged a couple of really vital symptoms that kind of signify burnout. But there are days when I'm just plain tired. Okay. Because I've worked some 8, 11 obscene hours a day, or that particular day. How do I know the difference between just plain old being tired and burnt out?
Yeah.
What's the difference?
There is a difference, which you will be able to recognize. Tiredness or exhaustion is physical, and with rest, you will feel better. You will recover.
Right.
But burnout is a crash. It's a crash into hyperarousal, where there is a flatness. There is, like I said, that there is an unwillingness to engage. There is no motivation. So all the hormones that I spoke about earlier have all crashed. So there is nothing that is an internal pick me up, and that's the difference. So I read this somewhere, and I think it beautifully sums this up, that burnout is when rest stops working. So that's the biggest difference that you will see between tiredness, exhaustion, and actual burnout.
And you're functioning. It's not like you're not functioning. You're going
You're
about your
functioning
regular
on
day.
reserve. You're functioning on reserve, and right, it's like when you're just at the last whatever of things,
Fumes.
and maybe just even that is expended and exhausted, and you're still just going on. It's like, again, a wonderful term to describe this. It's within that, treadmill life, which is, there's a lot of motion, but there's no forward movement.
That's beautiful, Farah.
Right? It when I heard that, it was such an aha moment for me. I was like, oh my God, that's precisely what this is. Yes. Yes.
I've always wondered, and I have a professional to answer this for me, with the amount of digital influence on our lives and the constant tech this, tech that, tech everything. Like I have a 3-year-old who saying, "Can you order this for me?" It's
Yes.
like disturbing. But I'm also seeing a lot of anxiety cases rising. Is there a nexus?
It's actually a very debatable, very controversial subject to
That's
talk
what we're here
about.
for.
But the thing is, technology has changed the world, and we cannot have this conversation without accounting for the benefits and how our life has improved with technology, right?
Yes.
So that we need to account for. The problem comes with the excess, and I don't know whether you remember in one of our sessions we had drawn that spectrum from green to red and kind of moved the arrow from healthy to unhealthy. And that's precisely where this conversation is also headed, that when that needle, unbeknownst to you, has started moving from the green into the orange, and before you know it, it's in the red zone. And that same very thing can have a healthy usage, but it can be misused as well, right? And that's phone technology. It's you cannot escape it. But the thing is that it comes with its set of issues. It comes with its very, very drastic. I mean, you can pick up any age group. You can pick up anybody. I mean, there's so many contexts in which we can have this conversation, and you will see that there is a certain way it is impacting that set of people.
Yes. Yes. No, but I also, आप बता रही हैं that there is a needle and इतने बेख्याली में तो हम जीते हैं. The reality of it is that. So how do I even have that level of awareness के बाद तब थोड़ा सा ना नजाकत वाले sphere में चली जा रही है. Are there any checks that I can or tips that I'll be like, okay, थोड़ा सा ना रायता फैल रहा है, control yourself.
Right. Yeah. See, the thing is that look at the world we're living in, right? I recently went to watch a movie, and till the lights went out, everybody was on their phones.
Yeah.
Right. I went for a comedy show, which was a live thing, and instead of seeing that thing, people wanted to chupke se record something.
Yeah.
Or see, or you go to a restaurant and you see most tables have the same kind of view, which is that each one is on their phone, the child is on their phone, and they're kind of, right? So in a world which is so connected, we are actually ironically so disconnected from each other, right? And that's the crux of the problem. And relationships actually start getting impacted. We see a lot of couples coming in, or people talking about their partners, saying that there's no connection because that one phone or that one device has actually become there's a if I were to lend something from transactional analysis, there is a role confusion. So that one phone also represents your work. It also represents ordering food or groceries. It also represents what you want to do for entertainment and relaxation. Even my calming app actually is on my phone. So, right, I listen to a lot of music when I go for walks, which is also on my phone.
Yes.
So that phone has become like a leash. Right?
Wow, yes. Your phone has become like a leash. Look at you dropping all these cool truth bombs.
Sad ones, though.
Sad ones, really.
Yeah.
And speaking of sad, if you're at a comedy show and you're secretly trying to record them, I mean, come on, man. Just come on, man.
Yeah.
We've spoken enough about tech, I think, but the reality is that tech, I mean, like you so beautifully said, that don't keep painting it out to be the devil. The reality is that tech ke alawa also we have figured out a way to land ourselves in burnout central, right? Matlab, it could be work, it could be personal expectations, it could be commitments at home, etc.
Absolutely. Right.
And it all just spirals one into the other, right?
Yeah. That phone or your different devices, notifications, all of these things are what we have told ourselves are the tools to become more efficient.
Yes, yes.
But actually, it's the Frankenstein that we have created, which is now looming to consume us.
Yes.
And that's the problem. And you're right, there are so many pressures even offline. So tech is not to blame, right? There are double income households, there are parenting pressures, there are aging parents, there are your own personal aspirations, self doubt about where you are in your career, right? Social scenes have become so pressurizing now, how you show up socially. So offline as well, there is so much going on, right?
Yes.
That technology is not all to blame, but there are so many other. I mean, just tying it up with the whole larger concept of burnout, there are so many areas in our life today which are causing us burnout offline also.
Yes, yes. And when it comes to like chronic burnout situation, um, are there any evidence-based micro things that we can do to kind of work towards it on a daily basis? Because I think the minute I speak about burnout, जिनको नहीं भी है, everybody is like, हाँ भाई बहुत थक चुके हैं.
Yeah,
So it doesn't have to reach critical level yet. But
Yeah.
are there any things that we're doing on like a daily basis where we're like, okay, I can keep things in check for myself?
Yeah. See, I think, even before we get to tips and suggestions, etc., it's important to understand for oneself what is really going on underneath that burnout. What's happening is there is a loss of personal agency.
Yeah.
Right? You just feel, what does personal agency mean? It means that things are in my control. And the loss of that means that I just feel that everything is too overwhelming, it's out of my control.
Yeah.
So I would say that the first step is to recognize and to name that I am feeling like I'm unraveling or that things are not in my control.
Yes.
Right? Remove the shame from it. Remove the guilt from it.
Yeah.
Right? It's so important for a person with whoever they think is safe and they can to be able to name it. I think that acknowledgement is the most important thing, because everything else that you do flows from there, right? And I also feel, before coming to the micro habits, that the other thing that needs to happen now, because of our lives, look at the pace of our lives. We are going at breakneck speed, and therefore the approach has to be multidimensional. It cannot just be one thing to do and that'll get you by. It's about changing your perspective, changing personal habits. And I always tell my clients this, that it's about consistency and moderation. You don't have to do big things. You have to do small things, but consistency is the name of the game, because only when you bring in small rituals back into your life, whatever those things are that you've committed to, that ritual restores rhythm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And our body is very forgiving. It really laps up on rituals, routines, consistency, and it recovers. So that's like the precursor before we get into micro habits. As far as micro habits are concerned, like I said, the first thing is to name it. And then it is to build, very intentional. And I use that word with a lot of intention and emphasis, that it has to be intentional, because ultimately you're the owner of your life, right? So nobody's checking up on you, nobody's keeping check and policing you here. So if you're fooling anyone, if you're not committing to it, then it's, who are you fooling here?
Exactly.
Right? So it's about that intentional commitment to doing something differently. People who are burnt out actually lack the capacity to jump back on the bandwagon, right? So starting with very small things like, for example, hydration.
Yeah.
Right? Just drink those 8 glasses of water. Or micro decisions like, I'm going to wear this tomorrow. I'm going to eat this tomorrow. Or, maybe the night before, write down the 3 most important things that you want to do, you want to accomplish, and set intention and allocating space and energy in your mind really helps the mind in preparing for what is to come rather than kind of go from fire to fire.
Right.
I would say that building those micro habits comes from micro intentions, micro decisions, and yeah.
Kranti nahi machani hai, baby steps. Yeah, but that's beautiful. And when I think about burnout, or say for example, I think of a person who is going through it, I also have noticed how it starts really playing up on their interpersonal relationships, on how they turn up in the world and everything, right? So, to somebody who is probably going through this, would you like to share a little bit more about that?
You know, by the definition of burnout itself, you forget relationships. You're so disconnected with yourself that how are you going to show up in other relationships? My favorite saying, which I often say in sessions, is that how can you pour from an empty cup?
I've heard this one.
You heard this one. Which is that when your cup is empty or there are so many energy leaks, how are you going to be present for other relationships, right? So it is important to enrich yourself first. It's kind of like that, wear your oxygen mask first kind of logic, right? Before you tend to others. And there is, see, emotional relationships, intimacy requires emotional presence.
Yes.
Right? And when that is missing because your mind is somewhere else on another to-do, life is a list of to-dos, right?
Yes, it is.
So when your mind is on checking those boxes, how are you expecting yourself to be emotionally present in relationships, right?
That's a beautiful perspective. But Farah, it's a beautiful analogy कि जब आपका प्याला खाली है तो किसी और का क्या ही भरिएगा. Fair enough.
Yeah.
How do I deal with the feelings of guilt that are attached to अपना प्याला भरना?
See, the thing is, again, this goes back to that question of why did this burnout, what is the genesis of this burnout? Look at our culture, look at what we are promoting.
Yes.
Right? Efficiency in, having 10 tabs open, doing things like at some kind of insane superhuman efficiency and speed.
And if you're a woman, then sacrifice is the foundational block of everything that you do.
Yeah.
You have to go the distance for your boss. You have to provide for your husband. Your children. मतलब आप पेट काट के अपने बच्चों को दे दीजिए kind of a situation is there. So we are systemically conditioned over generations. I may have come from privilege, but 4 generations back, what was taught to my grandmothers is probably still ingrained in me.
Yes. So productivity has always been stroked and encouraged.
Yes.
And performance has been, and we're all kind of victims of that messaging. And on the contrary, rest and have been mocked and shamed actually.
Correct. In Hyderabad, we have a term for it. क्या तो आदि कोंडे हैं तुम?
Which means
what a lazy lump you are.
Yeah, right. It has been, there is such a negative connotation with it that I was having a conversation with a colleague yesterday, and she's like, I asked her, I said, what are you doing? She's like, I'm doing nothing. Husband's gone to work, kids are at school. There is no work, so I'm actually doing nothing. And it just feels so weird to say that, right? Because we have this urge to fill our time with something, right? And there is this, call it a grandiosity or this need to just showcase our life as this spectrum and plethora of such awesomeness, right? And
peak efficiency.
Yes, right? And so many multitasking things we are doing, right? These things have been stroked by our culture. And that's the reason why there is so much guilt in filling your cup. What's that? Right?
Absolutely. So I think it's perfectly safe for us to say that this, blatantly uses. I don't think it's going to be plagiarism. It's okay if people are telling things in their house like, जब मेरा प्याला खुद empty है तो मैं आपका प्याला कैसे भरूंगी?
Yeah, it is, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we were discussing interpersonal relationships and even professional setups, but I've also seen systemic breakdowns of families because of a person's burnout.
Yeah.
We probably went through it in our households where our parents were just chronically burnt out and perpetually annoyed with us. Like आप उनके सामने ऐसे कूद कूद के जा रहे हैं because you're a kid and what do you know, and you've probably jumped too hard or something. You've been told off for that. And I mean, मतलब it's मैं बच्चा हूँ, मेरी core competency है ये.
Yeah,
you know.
truly, right.
So I mean that it's just heart-rending to see even family setups disintegrate as a consequence.
And when you were saying that, I just had an image of something in my head that back in the day, of course, they didn't have a language to call it burnout. Yes. Or to stop and acknowledge it. I mean, for people to even acknowledge burnout is a privilege, right?
It
Don't you
is.
think?
It
Because
really
that's
is.
the kind of world we are living in.
Yes.
But you'd see that there was, up until a certain life stage, parents were not emotionally present.
No.
Back in the day, right? And it was only after betiyon ki shaadi ho gayi, whatever, then you'd see. And I remember my own dad, like he was a different person after we got married. Probably in his head, he thought, okay, now my responsibilities are done and now I can relax in life. And I actually remember seeing, and it's true for so many people who are probably from that generation, that they see their parents in such a new light. Maybe they'll travel, maybe they'll do things for themselves or something like that, which they never allow themselves to.
Yes. You said it, allow. They never allowed themselves to just be, and it's heart-rending, you know. I mean, my dad used to be so perpetually stressed, and I keep joking with him that शादी के बाद suddenly मेरा brand value बढ़ा तो बढ़ गया आपकी आंखों में क्यों? Because now you're like, come beta, hang out with me, let's just chill together. And I'm like, yeah, what was all of this? Because back in the day, if he saw me chilling, he'd just be like, what are you doing? Go study.
Yeah.
You know, and that was all he knew. So it's heart-rending, yeah. But I want to believe that this generation is a little bit more aware and in touch. And I feel a little bad for our parents because we're a generation who keeps saying, oh, because of our parents, we have all these traumas.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the poor things went through so much and they couldn't call it traumas to begin with, right?
Truly. Yeah.
And, we've, of course, done the whole gamut of family and work and everything. I also want to understand how bad a beating does intimacy between partners what happens there because of burnout?
Any kind of intimacy, whether it's friendships, partnerships, even with your children, whatever it may be, requires emotional presence. And when you don't have the bandwidth to and what happens again at a physical level is that your nervous system is so dysregulated that it kind of goes into a shutdown or a protection mode.
Yes.
Right? So there is disassociation, there is disconnection, there is withdrawal, there is things like that. And intimacy, affection requires presence, and it requires being present in your whole self. So actually at such times, so people who are experiencing burnout, intimacy and affection can actually feel like yet another demand.
One
more thing to do, or one more person to please, or something like that. So it again goes into that vicious cycle of them just shutting down more and more. And sometimes not having, like I always say, it's a question of either it's an inability or an unwillingness. And actually in this case, it's a combination of both. That there is an unwillingness because of an inability to be present.
Yeah. You spoke about the nervous system being so unsettled. And a little while ago, you were talking about your friend and saying, I am doing nothing.
Yeah.
And, husband is not around, children are not annoying me. I am doing nothing. I don't have anything to do.
Yeah.
Have there been circumstances where the simple act of resting or doing nothing has also triggered the nervous system?
So, let me explain this to you with yet another, it's not a transactional analysis concept, but it's widely used, especially with the vagal nerve and the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system. There is something known as a window of tolerance, which is, and each one of us has a certain, our own window of tolerance, in
Right.
which we, again, I use the word normally with, normally.
Normally.
Yeah.
We're using for, if it's an audio thing you are consuming, we're using open inverteds in the air.
Yeah. So for a normal everyday functioning, there is a window of tolerance that we operate in, which is, how much we can do without pushing ourselves.
Yeah.
It is our status quo, go to, de facto mode, if you may call it
Yeah.
that. Right? Now, what happens is that when you hit the upper end of your window of tolerance because of, maybe deadlines, or maybe there's some illness, or some other life event, you go into hyper arousal, right? And there is a lot of agitation, prolonged stress, there is anxiety, and right? So you're in that kind of hyper arousal.
Yeah, but arousal is not the pleasurable kind. I think here we mean hyperstimulation.
Hyperstimulation.
I feel like we should be like, arousal
yes,
is good.
Yes, it is the arousal of the nervous system here. So it may or may not have overlaps with any other kind of arousal.
Yeah.
But for the purpose of this conversation, it is
no sexual connotations involved.
Yeah. So that's the hyper arousal. And when you hit the lower end of the window of tolerance, you slip into what is called as the hypoarousal. Right? So the hypoarousal is when you're in that state of flatness, irritability, low mood. Some people actually feel depressive, right? There is a cognitive fog. There's a clumsiness, forgetfulness that happens. That it's very distinct features of that hypoarousal. And burnout, if I were to describe it through the window of tolerance, you first go into hyperarousal.
Okay.
And you don't come back into the window of tolerance, which is your normal state of being. You crash into hypoarousal. And from that state, getting up becomes like coming up, or reclaiming that normalcy becomes very difficult. Yeah. So it's an important self-check tool for all of us to examine our own, window of tolerance, and try to find signs within us, of when things are now moving into a state of hyperarousal. Is it temporary? Because, I'll just come to that. Sometimes it's part of normal life to catch a plane, or to, in the morning when you're packing up tiffin and kids have to go to school, right? There are, or there's a deadline at work, or there's a deadline and kid has fallen ill. There are those temporary situations, and once they are done, you come back into your window of tolerance. Yes. But when you continue to stay in that hyperarousal, then there comes a time when you go crashing. So it's important to understand your own.
In our therapy sessions also, we used to have charts and graphs and diagrams. And today, again, I'm taking back the window of tolerance, and that's such an important one.
Yeah.
What are the physical manifestations of burnout on a person's body? And what happens over a prolonged period of time if burnout goes unchecked?
Yeah. So again, the chemistry of the body is that there's a cocktail of hormones, and they're working in this beautiful equilibrium and balance, right? The way we show up in our everyday life, ideally, again, quote unquote, right? But the thing is that when anxiety, stressors cause an imbalance, what happens is that after an initial spike, dopamine, endorphins, serotonin, everything comes down. What goes up is cortisol, adrenaline, and it's unexpended. So there's nothing happening to re-regulate it. Now, when this goes on for an extended amount of time, the physicality of it is that you will see a hormonal imbalance. There will be inflammation in the body. Yeah. There will be, suddenly you'll see people who put on a lot of weight, and there's this inability to lose weight, right? Sleep dysregulations, metabolic dysregulations, irritable mood, constant headaches, or gut issues, or, muscular spasms or tightness or something. These are the ways in which our body is literally like screaming SOS.
of course, it would affect your sexual arousal as well.
Yes.
Because that's also hormones at play.
Right, it is. And your libido
Yes.
is not high.
Right.
And especially for a lot of women, it is linked to their emotions and it is how their state of mind is, right?
Yes.
And when that is so messed up, the libido like gets impacted proportionately. So there's that. So of course you're not checked in, you're not and nothing helps. See, the thing is that burnout may what happens is that the things that were previously you liked, you don't like them anymore. They don't have that impact on you anymore. So it could be sex, it could be food, it could be social engagements, it could be any of those things.
It could be a person.
A person.
You liked that person. Now I don't want you to touch me.
Yeah.
Then that also happens, right?
Absolutely. Okay.
I've got to drop a bad word now. And I say bad word because I think culturally we're inclined to look at it as a bad thing. And that is setting boundaries.
The big B. Yes. Yeah.
So and I'm going to keep this as basic and simple as possible. How important is it, first of all? And the correlation between setting boundaries and burnout.
It's a very, again, whenever I have these conversations and I have a point of view on them, I look at it, I break it down into two ways. One is internal and one is external, right? So internal is what am I doing to implement some boundaries for myself, right? And what are the external means, what are the kind of boundaries that I'm going to put in place with others, right? And so when we talk about internal boundaries, see, of course, I'm assuming that we're talking about boundaries when a person has now got the awareness that something is not okay,
right?
And I need to fix this, right? The first thing is to draw boundaries around the things. See, coming back from a burnout is not about addition, it's about subtraction. It's about removing things.
Nice. Yes.
From your life, not adding more things or do this also now, right? Because to that person who is so overwhelmed, can you imagine what just, even if there are well meaning things, how badly that lands for that person, right? So the internal boundaries are first start with what can I remove?
That's brilliant.
And for that, yet another model coming your way.
Yay!
Is it's actually something we learned in MBA, but I found its use far beyond MBA, which is the Eisenhower's matrix. It's the important urgent matrix. So there's urgent, not urgent, important, not important, and in a state of burnout or in a state of high efficiency, high whatever, we think of in our mind's eye, we think of all activities, tasks, things to do in the important and urgent. And the first boundary that you can draw is that yes, it may be important, but it's not urgent. So you bring it down to the important but not urgent category, right? Yes. There will be some things which you will realize, like paying taxes. It's urgent because there's a deadline, but I can outsource it. I can give it to somebody. So it's not so important for me to do it. So I can do it like that, right? And then you will realize that there are some items which will, you'll have to grudgingly agree, fall in the not important, not urgent, yes, which are also draining your energy.
And you have to be honest about that with yourself.
You have to be honest about it, right? So that's a very important self-check tool which one can do every now and then when you're feeling overwhelmed, to actually just on pen and paper draw that grid and put those to-dos, populate your list and see what can you move, what can you outsource, what can you do away with. And I think that's a brilliant, constructive way of, I don't know whether it qualifies as a boundary, but as something you can do to change the status quo.
Farah, I'm so grateful and I'm smiling, and I think I distracted you because this is what I normally do and it has helped me so much. Your ability to be able to quantify the overwhelm is something that I have always really admired about you, because I'm like, okay, you'd be like, is it urgent? No. Okay.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And thank you for that. And I think our inability to set internal boundaries is the first most important thing. Tab jaake you're going to be able to let people know that thus far and no further.
Yes.
So yeah.
Right. And it begins with the self.
Yes.
If you cannot have the ability to allocate, all those things into different buckets, something is wrong.
Yes.
Something is going wrong in the way you're viewing your life, your tasks, and your responsibilities, which requires, a much. I wanted to come to the point of therapy. Maybe we can talk about that later. But sometimes things can, in a life stage, can be so overwhelming where you feel that, no, boss, there is a problem.
Yes.
And that's when a professional can help you without shame, without any kind of, you should have and you would have and all of those things, help you find a way out of this.
Yes. In fact, by later. Let's do this now because there was a moment of absolute overwhelm where I said, I need help. Can you help my viewers / listeners understand at what point should that moment come where you're like, खुद से नहीं हो रहा है, अब I need professional help. And no, छोटी बहन से बात कर लो थोड़ा better रहेगा, which works, okay.
Yeah.
And to the छोटी बहन who's sitting here, it really helps.
Yeah.
But and I've been a छोटी बहन who's reached out to my older sibling and said that, okay, bhai, what's going on? Let's talk. Yeah. But at some point, that is never enough because they come with their own biases, their own perspectives, their own thoughts about you. Yeah. What is that moment where when you realize that I need professional?
Yeah. No, 100%. And you're right that the first line of thing for most people is talking to a friend, talking to your partner, or maybe a colleague at work. Right? These are the ways in which we reach out. Our first fires of SOS, right? That something's not okay. I'm feeling it, or maybe somebody will notice it in you, etc. What happens is that that guilt, shame, and just that feeling that I don't know whether things can change. So there's also a certain hopelessness that is also lingering, right? That this is my life. How do I change it, right? Which makes you look at life or your situation in a very black and white or all or nothing way.
Yes.
So, a practitioner, there are CBT techniques which can help you work through these intrusive thoughts, can help you demystify or open up this all or nothing thinking, overgeneralizing. And those are specific neutral skills that maybe a close one may not bring in.
Yes.
Right? I'd like to say they go beyond empathy, which your first line of thing is already providing you, right? Concern, empathy, care, they're providing that to you. But beyond that, you need some more coping skills, hand-holding, which a professional can help you with.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you're really actively working towards destigmatizing mental health. But if there is somebody right now who is watching this and says that I really need help, but I don't have the courage to go ahead and do it, or there could be a situation where what will mom and dad think?
Yeah.
Because 90% of the times, after years of talking about it, finally my dad is just like, okay, beta, good for you. Yeah. If this is working for you, it's nice that you're speaking to a therapist, What would I say? And this is coming from a place of absolute vulnerability because I know that a lot of people are like, what would I say? कि घर पे लोग नहीं मानेंगे, तो मैं क्या बोलूं?
Yeah. See, the one thing that I could say is that घर पे मत बताओ अगर ये बात है तो. But that's not
problem solved.
If you are financially independent, I would encourage you to invest in yourself.
Beautiful. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I would really encourage you. And people look at therapy as a last resort where they think that, okay, now it's hitting the roof and now I need to do something about this. And that's when they reach out. But therapy can also be looked at from the lens of transformation, enhancement, right?
Yes.
Things don't have to be wrong or they don't have to reach like code blue or code red.
Correct.
For you to, then seek help. And if you're not financially independent and you are dependent on someone, even if it's not money, but the circumstances are that you have to tell everyone, see, has a different context,
Correct.
right? Then in those cases, I would really ask them to have an open and direct and vulnerable conversation with their loved ones about how they are struggling. And if they are your loved ones, they will understand. And I'm not saying that you have to come to therapy, but you have to do something to reclaim that personal agency that you have temporarily lost. That's the point.
So the crux of the matter is, Farah, that rebuild your relationship with yourself, and then maybe you'll feel a little bit of something germinating inside you, saying, "Okay, now I must try and fix all that I have um, lost in terms of relationships." Right? And I have a very Hyderabadi thing to say to you. Okay, चलिए फर्ज कीजिए कि आप relationship में हैं and burnout की वजह से सब बैगन में मिल गया है. Is this a point of no return, or are there ways for us to come back from this flatline situation?
Yeah, it is. Like I said, it is, and like you said, flatline temporarily though. And that's the hope in this hopelessness, that there is hope to come back. But what it requires is, it requires a huge shift. It requires not just personal habits to change, and that's why I stay away from tips, because unless you change your perspective, right? See, what they say is you can't heal in the same environment you got sick in, right?
Yes.
Which means that you really need to, and today's generation, people today have access, thanks to their phones and everything. They have access to the best of resources out there, right?
Ji.
So you have to also educate yourself in the language of care. Listen to podcasts, read books, educate yourself on what change can look like, right? And that's the first empowering thing that you can do, is acknowledge and be ready or be prepared to make a big change, right? The other thing that I think is equally important in this conversation is to do a little bit of, or maybe a big rewiring or recalibration around the values of contentment, fulfillment, pause, gratitude, right? Those have got lost somewhere. Nobody talks about contentment. They look like as a loser, that you have your, in your 40s you want to retire, so that's it. You're not going to do more. And, there's, again, that same culture is being stroked here. So it's really important to rewire and recalibrate some of those core things that are so important for groundedness, for just taking the pause and acknowledging all that you have accomplished, enjoying it. Actually, ultimately, the whole thing is that all this effort that you're doing to reach where you are today, when are you going to enjoy it? Right? So, I think these are some of the big shifts that need to happen before the micro habits and before all of these things can then come in, and change can start galvanizing.
So, I was, in fact, my follow up question was going to be what are some guilt free self care things that I can indulge in? And please don't say get a manicure or a pedicure, Shezzi, but something that will allow me to feel a little nurtured.
I'll answer this question from the lens of the nervous system. So the burnout has caused this drastic dysregulation within, right?
Yes.
And what the nervous system needs now to come back to a sense of safety and regulation are very low investment items, which means that, those things like going for a walk, movement is medicine. So the work you are doing, yoga. The other one is meditation. I read a beautiful line which says that breath is your life raft, which means that meditation and breathing is so important. And hydration, I cannot emphasize enough how important hydration is for you to just start reviving, literally reviving, right? Because when you've lost control over, your life or your body, the first way of reclaiming control over your body is by doing some of these breath, hydration, kind of things. Sleep, 8 hours of sleep. It is very important. And that's why that boundary, those external boundaries that we were talking about setting some time boundaries, which is about, after 10 p.m., I'm keeping my phone away. I will switch it on, or I will see it only in the morning, right? Or that tech boundaries. I will switch off unnecessary notifications, right? Because on every notification, there is an adrenaline spike that happens. There's an urge to reach out and check whether there's a fire I need to go and put out, right? So, turning off those tech boundaries, people boundaries. How can I saying no is a superpower? I say this to my clients, that learn the ability, practice it. I can do this, but I can't do this. Or that this looks interesting, but unfortunately, I don't have the time or the energy for it. Or can we shift this to another day because this is my day of or hour of rest? So, when you practice and familiarize yourself in this new language of boundaries, you will find it easier to, even if 50-70% you're able to do it, that is very, very good.
क्या क्रांति नहीं मचानी है. Little things go along.
Yeah,
Beautiful, beautiful. And you know, it's the best thing. The chartered accountant bini is thrilled about the fact that ये सारी चीजों के लिए पैसे नहीं लगते.
Our nervous system, our body is not looking for perfection. It is looking for consistency. It is only looking for consistency, safety, regulation. That's all that it wants.
Yeah. I'm sure that I've opened up something in somebody's brain out there, at least two people. Before we let you go, though, there is a round of what would Farah do that I want to play with you. I know it's very difficult to get a therapist to quantify things and say, ab batao, tick, 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 tick. Yeah. But I'm still going to hope.
No rapid fires.
Yeah. But I'm going to try, okay? And I'm going to give you scenarios, no rapid fire. Scenario number 1, there is a overworked parent who is just trying to be everything to everybody at the same time and is overwrought with guilt because they're not there enough for their child. Yeah. What would Farah say?
It's a very tough one, right? But it's about going back to the drawing board and looking at those role expectations. There are role definitions which we have just swallowed whole. Yeah. A mother is supposed to be or should be these things and all of that. So relook at those in your context. And again, maybe not urgent important, but important not important, and discard some of those that are not relevant to you.
I'm going to say something ridiculously controversial, but since you said mother's role, I also thought it's a great tip to remind your husband, hey, you're not a sperm donor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well.
Okay.
No, but I just on that point, I want to say that men are burnt out in very different ways.
Yeah.
And the idea here really isn't to vilify anybody or criticize anyone here. It is about we are the victims of our situations that we have brought upon ourselves.
Yeah.
So the guilt is also coming because you are not aligning with the original rule book. Guilt and shame are mechanisms that are put in place so that control can continue to play out, right? So each time you defy the rule book, the original rule book that you were taught, you will experience guilt, shame, regret. So go back to the original rule book, update that belief like you would update your phone software, and move on.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. There is somebody who feels absolute, like your friend, who feels absolute body reaction guilt about trying to take a break or slow down. What would you say to them?
Yeah, it's one that even I struggle with, to be honest. And I think what definitely helps is just owning your own narrative. Honestly, what I'm doing in my home, with my life, with my time is only my business and nobody else's, right? So again, coming back to the here and now and saying what is important for me. Put yourself ahead of others, put your needs ahead of others, and do it in a way that you own it. Yeah. Yeah. Unabashedly.
Unabashedly. Shamelessly. I've started repeating that word to myself that, be shameless about it, Jesse. It's fine, And when you're going to say you're so shameless to yourself, then the third person who says it, utna bura nahi lagta, to be honest.
You'd be surprised that if you do share this with someone, you are probably inspiring them, because in you doing it, you're actually offering them a permission that it's okay for you to do it too.
That's beautiful, yeah.
And just imagine a series of such permissions could actually change the way we look at that thing.
The cascading effect.
Cascading effect.
Hope springs eternal.
Yeah.
A couple that's burnt out beyond redemption doesn't know how to reconnect.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Yeah. Again, first, it's important to reconnect with yourself before you can attempt connection with anybody else. And we've spoken about some of the things that that person can do, but I think just some things that can be done is trying to align your schedules. I know it's not always possible, but if you can align your schedules in a way that there are some windows of overlap of free time, maybe even a meal together. Sometimes it's great to like make it a non-negotiable, like doing a meal together, or going for a 10-minute walk downstairs, or right, like any of those things that are okay for you to do in your setup. Must be made non-negotiable, because see, ultimately the thing is that self-care is as important as your other to-do tasks.
Yes.
Right? So it is not, it is a necessity, and it is not a cure. Let's look at it like this.
So scheduling date nights is not lame.
It's not lame. Yeah, but when you say date night, sometimes there can be an unsaid expectation from yourself and from your partner about, it'll turn out to into, perhaps you will sit in that quote unquote date night and talk about finances or kids or whatever. But yes, it's about just that exclusive time, 10 minutes, checking in with each other. And I think above all else, just to have a very real conversation with each other about how you're doing, what's the energy level, what you need more of, what you need less of, and just releasing that with your partner can be so connecting.
Yes. In fact, I was meaning to ask you this somewhere. We didn't get sidetracked. We were really on track. But I wanted to ask you this. When you're so long in a relationship, certain patterns emerge out of your burnout, where just, maybe your partner's asking something of you and you're just so tired in anticipation. कि आप झटका देते हो. You're very reactive.
Yeah.
How can I be less reactive and act more mindfully?
Yeah. There are, again, going back to a little bit of transactional analysis here, that there are stages of a relationship, of a couplehood, if you can call it. And one of them is, so the first stage is very nice because it's symbiotic, that's the honeymoon period. Then what happens is that one of them starts taking, gets back to work, and one of them is still relatively less busy, etc. And that's where the differences or the frustrations or the irritations start coming in, the complaints will start coming in, all of that. Then what happens is that the third stage is when both people are either working or are occupied in their own things, right?
Yeah.
So that's the practicing stage. And in this stage, the rift widens, and there is resentment that sets in. There are complaints, there is maybe more verbal fights about the dissent, all of that, right? And the thing is that what does the person who's burnt out need? They need empathy. because empathy has the tank is empty, right? There is no compassion, even for the self. Yes. So if in that moment that partner is cribbing or criticizing, it is actually perhaps not even landing because they are so checked out that they're not in a place to do anything about it. So at such times, empathy and compassion, I know it sounds a bit counter this thing that, I'm already so pissed off and you're asking me to show empathy. But if that happens, it is possible to reconnect. But criticism will not land because this person has already reached a space of emotional flatlining. Right.
Farah, you know what? Because our journey began with my whole postpartum conversations with you, I know for a fact I'm bringing you back for postpartum conversation. I feel like we should even bring you back for like a talk on relationships and stuff. Yeah. And I know that that is also something that you specialize in. So that is a call we will tackle later. But unfortunately, we've run out of time. Farah, this is a question I ask all my guests before I tell them that, okay, we're done. What is one cool 21st century living hack that you swear by, that has held you in good stead, and that can probably benefit the people watching this?
Um, because we are talking about burnout and technology and all of that, I think for me, going on a walk with music on and nobody with me, just alone walk with music, because I'm a firm believer in movement as medicine, and the way it has worked for me, helped me declutter, helped me just sort out my thoughts. And I would strongly recommend. I don't know whether it's 21st century or what. Maybe it's a little old fashioned, but it's
Still relevant.
It's an old as gold one.
Yes, oldies goldie.
Yeah.
Yes. And this is a great moment for me to do prachar and say, if you're in Hyderabad, come to my yoga shala.
Yes.
It has been truly, truly a beautiful experience having my therapist sit right next to me and talk to us and deconstruct this. If you found this conversation meaningful, I urge you to give us both a follow. I'm going to share our details. Please do write to us in the comments and let us know if you have thoughts, doubts, feelings, etc. Or if if this conversation led you to think a little bit and do a few things, course correct a little bit. We would be thrilled to hear from you. Farah, you know the affection that I hold for you. Thank you so much for coming on our show today.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad that I did. Thank you for having me. And these are important conversations, and I'm glad that you are using your voice to talk about some of these important things.
Thank you. And thank you. We'll see you in the next one.